Hi, I'm Marty Nemko. A Medium.com article last week offered a list of the top 10 things that adults would like to learn. Number one on the list, writing, how to write better. Well, here is a probably too brief how-to. Let's start with fiction. Usually, a first effort at fiction is safest if it's at least partly autobiographical, because you know yourself and your environment better than any other, and so you can credibly provide the detail and nuance that are key to effective fiction. But sure, deviate from being fully autobiographical. Fiction allows you to explore life choices that you haven't yourself made, but would find fun to play out. For example, if you've always been kind of a constrained person, have your protagonist start out that way, but after a pivotal event, for example, a windfall or a sudden divorce, that person tries unbridled experimentation. While many novels, screenplays, and stage plays don't follow a standard formula, a beginner could do worse than to follow the structure that dates all the way back to Aristotle's advice in his book Poetics. In short, it's put your hero up a tree, throw rocks at him, get him down. Let me flesh that out a bit. Step one. Start at quiescence. Have your protagonist start out doing something that the audience can relate to, but with an emotionally connecting quirk. For example, shaving, which is everybody can relate to, and using a tweezer to pull out stubborn hairs, whereupon, and this is the twist, one follicle bleeds. Again, something we can relate to, empathize with. Continue to establish the protagonist as a character we care about in ways like I've described, usually because he or she is the everyman, or is unusually evil but with a redeeming quality, perhaps brilliance, as in the case of Hannibal Lecter in the movie Silence of the Lambs. Step two, introduce a sidekick. Every protagonist needs someone to talk with. Give him or her an unusual characteristic, that is the sidekick. For example, he always tells bad jokes, and when people don't laugh, he thinks they have a bad sense of humor. Indeed, in a drama, the sidekick often serves as comic relief. Very few people want a story that's unrelentingly miserable. 3. Have an inciting incident, something that destroys the protagonist's quiescence and moves him or her to action. For example, in Quiescence, the protagonist is in the bathroom, say, admiring her breasts. Next, she opens the mail. It's her 23andMe genome result, and she has a gene predisposing her to breast cancer. Her doctor says it's a personal decision as to whether to have a prophylactic mastectomy. Step 4, maximize conflict. That brings us to the key element of fiction, conflict. And the higher the stakes, the better. In the example I just gave, the decision about the mastectomy is particularly high stakes because she loves her breasts. The conflict should rise in difficulty. So in this example, let's say she decides to not have the mastectomy, but soon feels a lump in her breast. Now we're talking not just predisposition, but a possibly cancerous tumor. She's terrified to go to the doctor, and we experience the anxiety along with her. She finally goes, and it's benign. Conflict 1, like all conflicts, except perhaps the story's last one, need be resolved in the protagonist's favor. The next conflict could have her mother diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. Does the mother accept treatment? There's a dilemma, there's conflict. Does the daughter now have the mastectomy? Conflict. What about the daughter's 16-year-old daughter? What if she decides to get her teen daughter a 23andMe report and she too turns out to have the gene predisposing to breast cancer? Does the teen get told? Another dilemma, more tension. Does she get a prophylactic mastectomy? More tension. All along, the protagonist explores the options with the sidekick. Step 5, the twist. About 3/4 of the way through the story, maybe after triumphing over, say, 3 conflicts, each one more difficult than the previous, an unexpected twist occurs. Maybe 23andMe discovers that it has been citing the wrong gene as predisposing to breast cancer, and that in fact, the daughter and her daughter are at very low risk. And the final stage, step 6, in fiction, again, in this formula, at least for fiction, is resolution. Dramas usually have sad endings, comedies, happy ones. And in our example, with their newfound freedom, the heretofore constrained mom and daughter could decide to ride the world's scariest roller coaster. And yes, that's metaphorical, roller coaster. Or you could try a bittersweet or ambiguous ending. So in our example, the story could end with the teen applying to college and deciding whether to major in genetics or bioethics. Yet one more conflict. Now let's turn to how-to writing. Topic. Write what's fresh and you know plenty about or are curious enough to research well. To write about what's often been written is like adding a grain of sand onto the beach. It doesn't do anybody much good. Not worth your effort. But for example, a lot has been written on time management. So even though it's a topic I'm interested in, and I know a fair amount about, unless my ideas or my approach are fresh, I won't write about it. Or take this little mini lecture. Of course, much has been said about writing, but usually they're long missives, long books, long articles. I decided to do this mini lecture and write an article that's the equivalent of it, because there is a paucity of highly distilled writing advice. Now let's turn to your approach to the how-to writing. If you tend to be logically disorganized, write an outline, or at least an ordered list of the major points. If, in contrast, you're a logical thinker, you might just start writing, beginning with a brief, maybe 20 to 50 word introduction. Why that brief? Because most how-to readers want to get to the meat fast. Then, present your first point, perhaps with a bullet or a bold-faced title. Keep your language simple and your sentences short, but if a less common word more accurately makes your point, use it. For example, in urging excision of unnecessary words, I use the word excision rather than the less precise word eliminate. Or if I wanted to be playful, instead of eliminate, I might say prune, pruning. Generally, to support each of your major points, provide one example, an anecdote, and/or a statistic. Don't force humor. If when you're writing, something amusing emerges, give it a shot, but even professional comedy writers have a hard time generating ha-has on command. That previous phrase attempts to provide an example of such organically derived humor. I could have written, come up with comedy on demand, instead of ha-has on demand, but both words popped into my head as I was preparing this, and I opted for the less expected, hopefully more amusing wording. And finally, capstone your writings. End with a sentence or a brief paragraph that does one or more of these. It places the work's, your article's advice or book's advice into a larger context. It exhorts the reader to action. Is humorous, for example, right on with like W-R-I-T and I-T-E, as a pun on right on. Or it refers back to a key point in the article's or book's title or first paragraph. For example, too brief? In other words, because I started this little lecture by saying it was very brief. It's a too brief. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Thank you for watching. If you liked it, please click like. You want to share it, there's a share button under this. And, of course, I welcome your subscribing to my channel. Anyway, again, thanks for watching. I'm Marty Nemko.